All right, today we're talking best QB situations in the NFL. So, Sam, I'm going to go through your list here. So let's have at it. Who's your number 10 best QB situation?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, what do you mean by quarterback situations, right? To me, I view it as like a three-pronged support system. Number one, how good is your receiving core? Both wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, just anybody the guy is going to be throwing the football to, how good is that situation for the quarterback? Number two, I think, is how good is the offensive line, the protection, keeping that guy upright, and also, whether they can lean on the run game a little bit, I think factors in there as well. And then number three, coaching. How good is, number one, the scheme, and then the actual guy, the play caller that's involved in those. So that's kind of the three pillars that I look at when I'm judging a quarterback situation. So number 10, counting down on my list, I'm going to go with Tua Tagovailoa for the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, the speed, the weaponry there in Miami is crazy. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, all the fast guys that they've been adding over the last couple of off seasons. Mike McDaniel as the coach, I think, is clearly a very good offensive mind and a great scheme. So that's two out of your three prongs that are in really, really good shape. And then the one question mark is that offensive line, which looks like a question mark on paper. It looks like it may have even gotten worse, but is at least offset a little bit by that McDaniel offense and the system and all those kinds of things.
I can't believe the Dolphins are 10. I was expecting them to be in the top three. I understand the three pillars. I get it. I understand that the offensive line on paper is subpar, maybe compared to others around the league. But we've seen Mike McDaniel and that type of offense, the Shanahan derivative, do well, no matter who is up front from an offensive line perspective. We've seen this offense have so much success. They've got all the speed and the playmakers that you mentioned. I am shocked that the Dolphins are only at 10. So let's see, who are the 9 others that are better than them?
All right, number 9, I'm going to go with Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. So, three prongs. I think the receiving core is in good shape. Maybe it's not as deep, maybe it's not as fast as Miami's receiving core, but Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is still there. They've added some guys to backfill that depth chart as well, lower down, even though they lost Tyler Boyd this offseason. I think the offensive line in Cincinnati is a bit better than Miami's as well. It's not great. It's not a massive strength relative to some of the other groups, certainly in this list, but it's pretty good. And then that offense, I think, under Zach Taylor has evolved and developed over the years. And early on, it looked like it was going to be very one-dimensional, and people were even making the argument that it was sort of holding them back a little bit relative to some other systems. But now I think he has developed a really good, symbiotic relationship with Joe Burrow, and it's an offense that helps him and enhances him as well.
It's not just some guys backfilling Tyler Boyd. It's the great Jermaine Burton, third-round rookie, who has unbelievable potential, Sam. You take out the character concerns that probably dropped him in the draft. He's a first or second round talent. So it could be a very special offense. To me, the big question is Brian Callahan out as offensive coordinator. How much of a handle did he have on Joe Burrow and all that relationship? Dan Pitcher takes over as offensive coordinator. I still think this is definitely one of the best units, though, especially because of all those playmakers.
All right, number 8, staying in elite quarterback land. I'm going to go with Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. This one's kind of tough, though, because obviously Andy Reid is one of your three pillars, one of the best offensive minds, one of the best offensive coaches in all of football. Clearly, that area is a great strength. But the receiving core last year was pretty weak. They've added to it. They've enhanced it this offseason, both in the draft and free agency. Hollywood Brown coming over in free agency. Xavier Worthy in the draft. Just two absolute blazing speedsters to be added to that group. Travis Kelce was not good last season during the regular season. Did not look like himself, but then playoffs happened. A switch was flipped, and he went back to being the best tight end in the game for their playoff run and through the Super Bowl. So the receiving core, I think, is still a little bit up in the air to know exactly what that is. Rashee Rice, obviously, with his off-field problems so far this offseason. And then the offensive line, which has been such a strength since that Tampa Bay Super Bowl, where Mahomes was just getting beat up all the way through that game. For the first time, it's got some cracks again, right? Those offensive tackles, I think, are not as strong as they've been the last few years. So that's an area of potential concern. But overall, really strong support group for Mahomes.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned first was the Andy Reid factor. I mean, that is the biggest part of any of this. I think even last year when they had their struggles at receiver, when the playoffs hit, they played to their strengths and they adjusted. And Kelsey did step up when he needed to. So I think that showed what they're able to do. Having Andy Reid always playing to the strengths of his players, and you add the speed that you mentioned, I do think Kansas City is deserving of being in the top 10 because of the coaching consistency. The line is still one of the best in the NFL, even with some questions at tackle. And the playmakers could be special because of the speed in Travis Kelce if he doesn't lose a step in his old age. So I think the Chiefs are deserving of being in the top 10 where they are.
And it's tough because sometimes the quarterback is going to make these groups look better than they actually are. So almost sort of artificially inflating his own support system from a perception standpoint. And that's where the next guy gets kind of interesting. Number 7, I've got Deshaun Watson for the Cleveland Browns. Watson has not been helping the Browns since they made that trade for him. Like, his play has been bad. He's been injured. But I think that's a phenomenal offensive line in front of Deshaun Watson. And I think the receiving core is dramatically better as well this offseason. Like, they've continued to add players to that. They trade for Jerry Jeudy. They've got Amari Cooper. They've got Elijah Moore. David Njoku at tight end was an incredible player last season. The backfield is a bit more of a question mark now with Nick Chubb coming off that injury. And then the coaching is the area where that's been a sort of state of flux, where they're trying to find somebody that can get the best version of Deshaun Watson out. That's at least an open question at this point. We know Stefanski is a really good coach, but he's sort of ceding some responsibility and some ownership of that offense to try and get the best out of their quarterback. So that's the one area of those 3 pillars that I have the most questions with.
Yeah, I might put the Browns a little bit lower, but I think other people might disagree with the Browns even being in the top 10. But the everything that you laid out, the consistent offensive line, even with injuries last year, they've been one of the better units over the last few years. And let's not forget, Joe Flacco wins Comeback Player of the Year off the couch to leading a playoff team. That is because of the supporting cast in part. David Njoku having his breakout season, looking like a star at tight end. Amari Cooper seems like perennially underrated here. Maybe not that alpha number 1 wide receiver like a Tyreek Hill or an A.J. Brown, but still one of the better receivers in the league. You mentioned adding Jerry Jeudy. I think the potential's through the roof here for the Browns. So it's more of a sum of the parts I think are really good in Cleveland rather than one pillar just being super strong.
All right, number 6, the player I think that probably sparked this entire idea, Caleb Williams, the first and only rookie, I think, on the list. Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick of the draft, is stepping into one of the best situations that any quarterback has to work with, not just among rookies, but among any quarterback in the NFL. The Chicago Bears have done such a phenomenal job putting a receiving core around him now with that trio of DJ Moore, of Keenan Allen, of Rome Odunze, added to the tight end, Cole Kmet, weapons that are there to let Caleb Williams flourish. Obviously, the question mark is on the offensive line, where that group didn't look great, but I think it's going to look a lot better when you remove Justin Fields from that offensive line and put Caleb Williams in there instead. That idea of how much is a quarterback affecting the supporting cast and being and influencing the perception of that support system. I think Justin Fields negatively impacted the perception of that Chicago offensive line. And as soon as you change the quarterback, obviously certain plays he would bail them out, but far more he stressed their protection and made their job much more difficult. I don't think Caleb Williams is going to do that. So I think that group there that Chicago has assembled makes this a top level support cast.
So I think the receivers are outstanding. I'll talk about them in a second, but I think you're underrating or maybe overrating the offensive line, underrating the impact that they could have. I don't think they were put into a ton of pure pass protection situations with Justin Fields. They did try to use a lot more misdirection and play action to play to Fields' strengths, and I think that helped protect the offensive line a little bit. I have more concerns about the line than you do. But that group of receivers, it may be the best group of receivers that just have defined roles. DJ Moore as your all-around guy, Keenan Allen as your high-end slot receiver, high-end possession type of receiver, and then Rome Odunze gets to get eased in as the number 3, just work down the field, just work the vertical pass game, and then don't forget about DeAndre Swift catching the ball out of the backfield. So pass catcher-wise, the Bears are maybe in the top 3, but I do think that offensive line is holding them down just a little bit because pure pass protection situations, I'm not sure they're ready to do that just yet.
All right, you want to talk about a better offensive line? How about the Atlanta Falcons? Everyone's focusing on the skill position players, the receivers, the players that were getting mistreated, misused by Arthur Smith in that offense. Well, they're all still there. Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, all these incredible weapons for Kirk Cousins to throw to. But that's also a really good offensive line as well. So that's two of your three pillars. And then the third one, obviously, former colleague, Zach Robinson. We know what Zach can do. We know what a smart offensive mind he is. He's coming from that Sean McVay coaching tree, bringing that offense with him. So I think that's all three pillars are in really good shape for Atlanta and for Kirk Cousins.
We are easily swayed when our friends are the play callers. I imagine the Texans are coming up soon here. But yeah, look, the Falcons, I think they're in an excellent spot here. I also think there's a reason, Kirk Cousins, every time he hits free agency, he looks at those things, right? He likes to go to a place that has a good situation. And it was before they drafted Michael Penix as his replacement. But he's got good playmakers to throw to. I think it also, so Drake London has a chance to become an even bigger star, I think, here in year 3. Darnell Mooney, just as a pure deep threat. I still think we're waiting for Kyle Pitts to realize his potential, and maybe that'll come here with Kirk Cousins throwing the ball, Bijan Robinson out of the backfield. And you mentioned the line, similar to the to the Bears as far as protected a little bit, I think, as far as the run game goes. But they're still underrated, I think, relative to the rest of the league. So, yeah, I love what the Falcons situation is. And then Zach Robinson brings, Sean McVay's system plus his own little wrinkles. I think Atlanta has all the makings of having one of the top offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, and then our other buddy coming up right now, the Houston Texans. Obviously, Bobby Slowick, first year in the job as offensive coordinator. He gets a pay rise, and he has to start turning down head coaching jobs. That's how good a job Bobby was doing with his version of the Shanahan offense this time around. So that's one pillar, obviously in great shape. The receiving weapons that they've assembled now for C.J. Stroud are crazy. They bring in Stephon Diggs to add to Nico Collins in his breakout season. Tank Dell coming back from his injured leg, and then obviously getting shot in the offseason. Once you get clear of those two problems and get him physically 100% again, Tank Dell's ready to cook. This is a phenomenal group of receivers that Stroud now has to work with. Questions a little bit on the offensive line, but again, like Miami, we know that system protects its offensive linemen extremely well. I think it's a better offensive line top to bottom than Miami's is.
See, this is where I think Miami should be in the same range as the Texans. I think it's very similar across the board. You could give the Texans the edge as far as a volume of pass catchers, but I think the 1-2 punch of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle certainly comparable to what the Texans have with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. But I love what Houston has with the trio of receivers, plus Dalton Schultz as a fourth option at tight end. He has been very dependable, always seemingly a part of these loaded receiving cores. And don't forget they added Joe Mixon in the backfield. They did struggle to run the ball last year when they wanted to. Mixon, I think, is going to add a little bit more efficiency to the run game. So, yeah, Houston, with Bobby calling the shots there, absolutely one of the league's best.
Number 3, Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, a situation that he has there to work with. Maybe the depth isn't as good as it's been in previous seasons, but the starting caliber of support system is still really, really good. That offensive line has been the best line in the league for a couple of years now. It should still be one of the best offensive lines in the league, even though they have to, replace the retirement of Jason Kelsey and maybe reshuffle a little bit on the inside to accommodate that. And a guy like Lane Johnson at right tackle is another year older. It should still be a really good offensive line. The pass catchers are fantastic. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith are a phenomenal 1-2 punch. Maybe, again, the depth there is when you start to get into questions. If one of those guys gets hurt, then it's a different conversation. The depth isn't as good at receiver as it used to be. But you go to a different position. Dallas Goedert, at tight end, is still a really good receiver. Saquon Barkley now, out of the backfield, can be a really high-end receiver. So they do have pass catchers, just fewer are at the wide receiver position than in the past. And then the coaching got a bump this offseason. We bring in Kellen Moore as our offensive coordinator. That should be a big upgrade over the struggles from last season. So I think Philadelphia is in a really good situation for Jalen Hurts to work with.
Yeah. Heading into last year, we probably would have had the Eagles high on this list as well. We didn't know that the coaching situation was going to be as bad as it was. The Eagles really struggled on third downs. They struggled against the blitz. They really missed Shane Steichen. And look, Kellen Moore might not be a top 5 offensive coordinator, but I do think they're just going to be a lot more consistent on that side of the ball. And all the players that you mentioned, look, I think A.J. Brown is an absolute game changer. Devontae Smith, maybe the best number 2 receiver in the NFL. He's a 1 for a lot of other teams. And I think Saquon Barkley's ready to have the biggest year of his career because of all these other pieces, because of what Jalen Hurts can do as a runner. So, yeah, the Eagles might not have the depth of some other teams, but, yeah, they're always loaded up front with a ton of pass catchers and a more consistent coaching situation than they were last year.
All right, 2 guys left. Jared Goff, I think, in the Detroit Lions is one of the best situations in the NFL. This is another team. They might have the best offensive line in the NFL. They've had one of the best for the last couple of years. If Philadelphia takes a step back this season, Detroit could have the best line in football. Ben Johnson, another offensive coordinator that's been turning down head coaching opportunities left and right over the last couple of years, like our friend Bobby. He stays in town. So you've got one of the best offensive coordinators and play callers out there. That's 2 out of your 3 pillars in great shape. And then the third, the receiving core, is headed in the right direction and is already very strong. Amon-Ra St. Brown obviously gets his extension, his big contract. He's one of the best receivers in football. Sam Laporta, the rookie last season at tight end, had an incredible year, one of the best rookie tight end seasons ever. You've got weaponry out of the backfield. Maybe if Jameson Williams, if he takes a step forward as that speedster wide receiver, a former first-round pick, that could catapult them to a completely different place. But even if that doesn't happen, I think that receiving core is more than good enough to put them firmly among the best situations in the NFL for any quarterback.
Yeah, that consistency with Ben Johnson at offensive coordinator, I think that's the biggest one. Like, I mean, if he takes one of those head coaching jobs, that probably drops the Lions a few rankings. I know how you think, Sam. You're a huge Ben Johnson fan. Sure. If he's not there, maybe he's 5th, or maybe they're 5th or 6th. Maybe they're even lower just because of that uncertainty at offensive coordinator. But knowing that Ben Johnson not only has these players to work with, but always puts those guys in position to succeed. He always plays to the strengths of that team. And everybody's hyping up Jameson Williams this offseason, that speed that he has, the Jahmyr Gibbs speed, the Sam Laporta as a mismatch weapon. It is just a team of potential mismatch creators. I think that's why the Lions are so high.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the impact that losing a coordinator can have last season with the Philadelphia Eagles that we just talked about. Obviously, Ben Johnson staying there is a really good thing for the Detroit Lions. But the other way of mitigating that loss of coordinators is have the head coach be the guy that does it. And that's where the number 1 team, I think, is unquestionably the San Francisco 49ers. Look at the coaching talent that the 49ers have hemorrhaged in recent years with their coordinators being poached and stolen by every team left and right. Our friend Bobby Slowick, Mike McDaniel, 2 of the guys on this list came from under Shanahan, not to mention some guys from the defensive side as well, Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans. But it doesn't matter because Kyle Shanahan's the guy that executes the offense and orchestrates the whole thing. He's one of your 3 pillars. He's one of the top offensive minds in the game. So they have as good a coach as anybody out there for Brock Purdy to work with. The receiving core, like the embarrassment of riches that the 49ers have in terms of skill position players is ridiculous. You could make a compelling argument that they have the best running back in the NFL, who's also the best receiving running back in the NFL, along with the best tight end in the NFL in George Kittle, the best fullback in the NFL in Kyle Juszczyk, and then a collection of devastating, unique receivers in terms of Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, add a guy in the draft, Ricky Pearsall in the first round. Just so many weapons for this guy to throw to. And again, the offensive line, it looks like the weakest part of the unit on paper, but it still features the best left tackle in football in Trent Williams and another group that has not exactly been exposed at points during the season. So I think the 49ers is head and shoulders by far and away the best situation any quarterback has to work with.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even if Brandon Ayuk was traded ahead of the season, they're still probably number 1. This is why nobody can have a level-headed conversation about Brock Purdy. Nobody can say, Brock Purdy's good, Brock Purdy's great, look at all these stats, he's Joe Montana, he's Steve Young, because of all these pass catchers, and of course because Kyle Shanahan pulling all the strings, because Shanahan has a history of elevating quarterbacks, being a great play caller, doing that consistently, and he's got all these weapons. So that's why you can't have a normal Brock Purdy conversation because it's the best situation for any quarterback. So solid top 10, Sam. Two teams, though, that come to mind that maybe you missed that could squeeze in here. The Minnesota Vikings, and then a little bit less so maybe the New York Jets. But the Vikings in particular, with Justin Jefferson, year 2 of Jordan Addison at receiver, TJ Hawkinson at tight end. They bring in Aaron Jones at running back, and they have a solid offensive line. The Vikings have all the makings of a top 7 or 8 group, so they're not on your list here. And then the Jets, let's assume health for all the guys that they bring in. Mike Williams coming in to complement Garrett Wilson at receiver, Tyron Smith coming in at left tackle, Morgan Moses at right tackle. The Jets have all the pieces of a top 10 unit as well.
Yeah, I think you can definitely make a strong argument for the Vikings. Jefferson, the best wide receiver in the NFL, certainly top 2. Christian Darrisaw is a really high-end tackle. In fact, both tackles are. Brian O'Neill at right tackle. I still have some questions about the interior, but that's no different to some of the other teams on this list as well. And Kevin O'Connell as the offensive coach, the head coach that's also the offensive mastermind, is a really good pillar there as well. So at least 2 out of the 3 pillars are in really good shape for the Vikings, and the third one is not bad either. So, yeah, I think the Vikings absolutely have a top 10 case.
So there you have it. It's Sam's top 10, but no Vikings, no Jets. Didn't even get to discuss the Rams, the Packers. They're like our offseason darlings, Sam. The Packers, I think maybe a year away from being on your list here. What about the Ravens and everybody that they have with Derrick Henry coming in? So let us know where Sam missed here and which teams should be in the top 10.